5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
And welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. I am your host, Justin. We got a full crew today. Welcome back, boys.
Hey, everybody.
Good evening.
As I was saying before, you guys missed a really good show with Mike Mason last time, but you all had good excuses, so I'll let it slide this time.
Yep.
Mea culpa.
We got a good show for everybody today. We are talking about the everlasting threat, which, what does that mean? Well, we'll get to it later in the show. But I'm excited to talk about it. But first, how was your Geek Week? Jason, let's start with you.
Okay, I had a fun Geek Week. Mine was video game related. So I played a game called Tainted Grail Conquest. It's on Games Pass. Most of the games we talk about here, I play them from Games Pass. But it's a fun rogue card game. But it's not really a card game. It's more one of those like... It's kind of a random dungeon rogue game where you go out into kind of the wildlands from your little village. And every time you go out, the monsters are kind of spread out differently. And when you have encounters, you pull from a deck of cards that you're building to use abilities, like to block or to, backstab or certain things. So, but it's a 3D, it's not a card. It's not a video game card game. It's an actual 3D dungeon there. It's just you're pulling from cards that are in front of you that you play. So there's several games that are like that out there right now. This one was really fun because it has some really cool combos with the cards, and you have different fantasy classes you can pick your character to be, and it really is kind of roguish in the sense that every time when you die, your game is wiped completely, except for a few things that you kind of unlock along the way. Like as you play the game, you'll unlock special cards, and then the next time you start the game, you don't start with those cards in your deck, but you can find those cards quickly when you play the game, when you get into the dungeon early on, so you can rebuild your deck really quickly. So as you play the game, you start to get your character still starts from square one, but you can build your deck to be powerful a lot faster, so it helps you kind of get a little bit further and a little bit further through every part of the dungeon. So I had a lot of fun with it. There's 10 classes. I only played 2 of them. It has leaderboards, so every time you do a playthrough, it kind of saves your score, and you can compare it to people online and their friends' score. So I recommend it it is not a super fast-paced game. You're going to spend a lot of time looking at your card and thinking which card, because you only play a limited number of cards every round, and you're kind of trying to think about what's going to happen next round. You're looking at the enemies in front of you. You can't see their cards, obviously, and you're trying to gauge what's the most effective thing too. So if you like that kind of thought tactical play, highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and if you have Games Pass, it's basically free for you. So I would shoot it up.
Nice. I was just looking up a little video of it. It looks really cool.
Yeah, it's fun, and like all games, you don't even have to install it. You can play it through the cloud streaming now, which I think everybody who has Games Pass has access to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I played it most of the time. And actually, what was really cool about Games Pass, right, is with the cloud, is that all of your game is synced to the cloud too. So I played it on my Xbox, then we went on vacation, and while we were on vacation, I just pulled it up on my phone, and I continued playing on my phone. So really, really cool, really powerful. At some point, I think we're seeing a movement that, with Microsoft at least, that I think in the future, I think we're going to be game streaming through set-top boxes and smart TVs. And the Xbox consoles themselves will be reserved for the elitists who still want to buy those. I already got a notification from Microsoft saying that I can stream my cloud Games Pass to my Samsung TV with a controller
really?
now. Yeah.
I saw that too. I was like, holy smokes, that
I
is
think
pretty cool.
I think Microsoft is really making some strides here, man. I mean, can you imagine? Get a smart TV with Bluetooth, sync up a wireless controller to it, and then just stream your Games Pass service. I mean, you're not paying the $400 to $500 every couple of years on a console, but you're paying $14.99 a month. Like that seems like the money cow that Microsoft's really going for right now.
Yeah, and it gets you out of buying that piece of hardware every X number of years.
Yeah.
Hardware shortages,
Yep.
supply chain cost. It's obsolete the day you plug it in your house.
Yeah.
So thin client. What do you call that when you have a? Is it
It's a
thin
thin
client?
client.
It's
Yep,
a
it's thin client.
So
Yeah.
essentially, there's a Linux machine inside your Samsung TV, and Microsoft is like, let's talk to that. Let's send an image over. The trick is latency, right, for video games?
Yeah, and I will say, Microsoft's not the first person to do this. There have been several startups that have started and bankrupted themselves over the years because the infrastructure hasn't been there to support. Live.com was, I'm sure that's been used for lots of things, but Live.com was the name of a startup company that tried this back before, probably almost 20 years ago. They were trying this, and it was really when everybody was on cable modems, and we were just starting to get cable modems move off of dial-ups and stuff. So I think at this point in time, the infrastructure is out there to support this type of latency. I don't even notice. I'll tell you this: I can't play first-person shooter games very well over it. I played play Serious Sam, and that game it kind of plays okay, but you definitely see that they're cutting back. The quality of the video stream to, I don't know, maybe to prioritize the quality of service. But with games like Tainted Grail, where it's just a tactical, thought-playing game, I don't need that latency, and it plays very well for those kind of games. Are we going to see first-person shooters? I think potentially as we start to see, better infrastructure reach the masses. But
I mean,
anyways.
Fortnite, Call of Duty, they're already out there for mobile devices and things like that.
Well, but they install directly on the mobile device.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So
running.
So
yeah.
if I'm pulling down 400 even over Wi-Fi in my house, and I'm uploading around 200, shouldn't that be fast enough?
Well, it's not about your throughput. It's about your latency.
The latency, right? It's how long it takes for that 1 and 0 to get to the server in some data center somewhere, and then come all the way back.
It's like you can push 10 up to 50 megabits through a satellite, but it takes time for the speed of light to travel up to the satellite and come down. So you'll get the same throughput, but your latency, which is fine if you're browsing the web, it just takes a little tiny bit longer for the web page to first pop, or even to stream videos. It's just taking a little bit longer for that stream to kick into gear. But when you're playing a game that's interacting with other players online, you need that twitch reflex for something Call of Duty. Mm-hmm. You can't afford, a half-second delay or a quarter-second delay, which you get with a geosatellite, by the way. You can't afford a quarter-second delay because you'll be dead. The other guy will already have you in his crosshairs before you even come around the corner.
Right, so you could see this kind of a bifurcation in gaming where people that are going to play, super low latency, AAA titles, whatever, are going to need consoles and the whole traditional model. Where every other kind of creative game thing that you can think of, where there's a half a second to think in between every move.
Yeah.
And then you've got more creative people, it becomes cheaper to roll out those games, and the game ecosystem expands. I think I kind of caught up with the Series X and the Games Pass. And I was just blown away at the different types of games that there's different creativities out there that are really fun and cool.
Yeah.
And so I think when you take that piece of hardware out of the way for somebody to get into it, I think this good things can happen in the future. More people will be playing more interesting things.
For sure. Boy, that was a tangent. I'm going to end my Geek Week right there and pass the ball back to you, Justin. That was good talk.
Dan, how was your Geek Week?
Good. I GM'd for a second time on our West Marches group campaign with lots of players and multiple GMs. And Jay played in that session.
Yeah, it was fun.
The trick is not knowing exactly who's going to show up. That's kind of different. Not knowing the skill set, right, that's going to show up. You might have 2 pilots and a mechanic and only one guy who can shoot, right? That's weird as a GM. And then what I did is I didn't plan one mission. I planned 10 missions, and I posted them all, and somebody said, let's do this one, and I did that one. Cool. Not knowing if it was going to be a good fit for the group, not knowing, there being a lot of, as a GM, it required a lot more improvisation and just kind of rolling with the punches. But it was good, and it's fun and flexible.
I wonder, let me ask you, if the session wasn't a good fit for the people, is there some fun still to be had in that?
Well, that's the thing, is that you need to blow up all your rails. You have to run RPGs sandboxy, Mad Max style. Mm-hmm. You can't have this always leads to this, which always leads to this, which always leads to that. You can't do it that way. Basically, if you just know what happened and why things are happening, what happened before the players even started on their mission, and who's incentivized to do what, you should probably be okay. Mm-hmm. Without coming up with, Combat 1 and Social Encounter 2. Mm-hmm. It's all the same toolkit that you need to run a sandbox RPG. It's just you're not going to be able to go find the rails and use them as... If they become much more obvious that you're putting everybody on rails if you choose to do that, because it's so why are we having space combat when no one in the group can fly a ship or shoot a gun?
Right.
And so yep. Don't think linearly. You've got to mind map it, draw everything out in 2 dimensions, and see how you can get from A to B by hopping to C to F to E to Z and then back to B. So that's my 2 cents there.
Nice.
So that leads into my other Geek Week, which is the light cut topic of GM compensation. And I have 2 angles to hit it. The first angle is we had a pretty decent discussion about, well, if we're doing this West Marches thing, and if all the GMs also have player characters that play every now and then, why can't they get XP when you're GMing? And I thought, at first, the old school gamer in me was like, no, that breaks the social contract of a role-playing game. Why would we do that? And then you think about it, you're like, okay, well, that's because you have one guy who's deciding to run one story or one campaign with his group, or her group. And that's kind of the traditional model, that the GM gets the benefit of storytelling and the players get the benefit of playing the game and getting XP. Well, the West Marches thing kind of blows that up a little bit, because the next mission may have absolutely nothing to do with the last mission. And so we're going to try out letting, if a GM has a character and XP was handed out that mission, even though that player wasn't on the mission, that character could have been off doing things to get XP. So we'll see how it goes. If people get annoyed with it, then we'll roll it back. But we're kind of blowing up the traditional RPG group model. So why should we stick with all of these other rules that Gary Gygax came up with in '78?
Right.
So the other compensation thing is I found out that one of my first GMs from when I was a teenager is now a professional GM.
Oh, wow.
In the Las Vegas area. So he's, running 5 or 6 or 7 different games. He's on Roll20, and he's have game will travel in that geographic area. And he's charging for a Roll20 session $15 a person.
Interesting. Per session, huh?
Yeah, for a 3 to 4 hour session.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not.
You think
that's
so?
Not, oh,
15?
dude, $15 for 4 hours of a
cheaper
game?
than the movies. It's cheaper than movies and a bag of popcorn.
It is totally cheaper than movies. It's
That's
cheaper
true.
than going to the arcade and putting $1 into an arcade for a 30-second play.
Yeah. I guess inflation got me, guys. Sorry.
I think the problem is that we're, the most of us, we're so used to just finding a friend and getting together and doing it for free in a bag of chips that you bring. The concept of, I found this before, the concept of a professional GM is a little bit obscure to a lot of us because we're so used to it just being a hobby thing that friends get together and play.
Right.
Yeah, I could see, let's say if I moved to Timbuktu and retired in a small town somewhere, I would not assume that I would be able to form a really thriving, community of gamers that we have here in our area. I wouldn't expect that as possible. So yeah, I might, if I'm retired, sure, I'll throw $15 at a game once in a while. It doesn't seem too far off, but
No, not at all.
but it was fun to see the guy who was 16 and I was 12 or 13, and we were all in his session together. He's still at it all
awesome.
these years later. So yeah, and once again, and that goes with the same theme, which is let's bust open the model of why do we keep doing things the way that Gary Gygax thought we should do them in 1978. There's no reason that we have to always use the same paradigm over and over again if everybody agrees.
Yep.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree
I think
with that.
it's interesting.
That's my Geek Week.
Very good. Let's see. For my Geek Week, beginning of July, I didn't do a Geek Week with Mike Mason just because I did do a Geek Week. I talked about this a little bit, but I want to get into it a little bit more. I started up with the Storytelling Collective, writing my own RPG that I am going to publish. I chose the Call of Cthulhu path. So I'm writing a Call of Cthulhu mission or adventure right now. I'm woefully behind on it.
This explains why you haven't been so active on Discord.
Well, I'm not that active on Discord because I can't get it at work. So that's part of it.
That's a barrier.
Yes, exactly. But the other part is that I was at youth camp, and then rugby has been dominating my life, but youth camp is over as of last week, and rugby is over as of next Saturday. So I'm going to be banging away on this storytelling collective and knocking my adventure out. I've already got an adventure. It's an adventure that centers around a mine in 1870s Virginia City. So Nevada, Virginia City, Nevada.
Oh, I'm familiar. I'm from.
Yeah.
This is the one thing we have in common.
That's right. So I'm very excited.
Can there be singing of the Nevada song? Home means Nevada. Home means
Home
the hills.
means the hills.
Home
Yeah, we know.
Most people don't know this, but all the kids who grow up in Nevada have to learn the Nevada State song.
Yeah.
And you can run into somebody and sing the song with them, and everybody knows those three bars, and then it ends. But we all
Do kids that grow up in Nevada, are they also taught that the Nevada flag can also be flown at the same height as the federal flag?
That would be other states in the union. No.
Okay.
We're battle-born.
Okay.
We're battle-born. We're a union state, which is why
That's
we're a
right.
deep navy blue. We were founded by Abraham Lincoln to get 3 or 4 extra electoral votes at the last second.
and all the silver that was coming out.
And all
of
the
those
silver
mines.
that was coming out of there. Yeah,
He needed to pay for some guns. Bad.
There were people in Utah. There was silver in Nevada. Nevada got statehood way earlier.
Way earlier. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to derail you. You got me on
So-
my Nevada thing.
No, it's good. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like I was thinking about adventures. In fact, I sent Jason 10 different plot hooks that I had kind of come up with, and between he and John Tross, we kind of narrowed down onto this mine one. And what's cool about it is I'm pulling from a lot of my childhood, so stuff I know, right? That I learned about Virginia City. So it almost writes very easily because it's not like I'm making up the world. The world is somewhere where I have actually been and I have actually seen. So I can talk about the Bucket of Blood Saloon that's there. and talk about some of the mines and what they were like, because I have been in some of them. So it's kind of cool.
You may think this is lame, but I did the exact same thing for one of my Star Wars campaigns. And that sounds ridiculous, but I was the only one in the group. I was the GM. I was the only one in the group who'd been to Galaxy's Edge.
Oh, nice.
And
I've been there, actually.
So I knew the names of all the animatronic people and the names of everybody who owned all these things and how far away everything was. They thought it was immersive storytelling. No, it was me being a tourist.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The other thing that I did for my Geek Week was that I got to play the only copy of Darkest Dungeon in North America. Now, for 4
weeks. In 4 weeks, it won't be the only copy.
Well, actually, it will be. It will be.
Oh, they're not going to... Gen Con, it's not coming out of Gen Con?
No. So for those that are like, wait a minute, I thought Darkest Dungeon was a video game. Yes, it is, but it was turned into a tabletop game by Mythic Games. And Lincoln Tidwell, who's been on the show a couple of times, he is going to be demoing it at Gen Con. And so they will have the demo there, but the game does not ship until, I think, next year. So maybe later this year, but I think it's actually early next year. So I've played the game. It is amazing. We've got time that we're going to play it again this week. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you're going to Gen Con, check it out at the Mythic Games booth. It's a lot of fun. So
see, this is your opportunity to go on the boards and write your opinion down and be like an opinion maker on it, because you're ahead of the ball game. You could update the Tabletop and Beyond website with a review, and everybody would be like, "Oh, somebody's playing this."
It's true. However, there may be a moratorium on me putting out a review. It's not like they had me sign an NDA or anything, but out of respect for Lincoln, I haven't posted anything, because he's like, don't share anything about this yet, because he's got the only copy and he's sharing it with me. So, I don't think
scam.
I think there's a gag order on me posting a review.
You have a gag order? Bummer.
I don't know. Maybe.
Internet scoop, man. You've got your moment. Take it.
Yeah, then I'll never see another pre-advanced copy ever again.
Yeah, but you drive traffic to the site, you get more eyeballs, then you get more advanced copies. I'll shut up now.
But yeah, no, it is a blast. I didn't back it. I meant to back it and even do a late order, but I just never did. And now I'm wishing that I did. It comes with a ton of miniatures, and they're all amazing looking, really, really cool miniatures. So
Lincoln has this way of making us feel guilty for not backing things.
Without doing it on purpose, right?
I know. He was like, it's so awesome. I got all this really cool stuff. You backed it, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I was gonna, and then I missed the deadline.
If I'm not mistaken, we love Lincoln, but he has a very large collection of unplayed stuff in his basement.
we balance things. If we'll post a link, we'll say, look at this awesome new board game on Kickstarter, and all of us will be like, yeah, it looks really cool, and then someone will be like, I did it, and I'm like, okay, I guess we don't have to.
Right.
Because we'll just play it when you get it.
Yeah.
But we spread it, so we'll get something else. Right?
Well, Lincoln usually backs stuff, and then he'll get a copy from when he does Gen Con as well. So they pay him in board games. So he usually gets a bunch of copies of their board games. So he has 2 copies of every game that they have. So, which he's kind of a hoarder. He's a self-proclaimed hoarder in board games. So,
hey Lincoln, we love you. We want to play more of your stuff.
I tell him that all the time. This is not news. But speaking of news,
oh, is it time?
Oh man,
I know
that was a quick segue.
You totally snuck up on me.
I did.
Welcome again to Tabletop and Beyond News. I felt good.
That was
I'm not
good.
gonna lie, that felt good.
It's been a while.
It's been too long. So lots of great, interesting news. Now, you guys realize that I'm leaving a lot on the cutting room floor because the weeks up to Gen Con, everybody's doing all of their stuff. So as we get closer and closer to Gen Con, the news is just going to like saturate. But we're not going to spend the whole time talking about news because that would drive our listeners crazy. But a really important piece of news, one of the biggest pieces of news that's going on in the tabletop industry is Roll20, the most popular virtual tabletop gaming platform, and One Bookshelf, the premier online vendor for tabletop gaming industry, announced today that they are coming together in a joint venture. Now, One Bookshelf does drive-through RPG.
Yep.
And the DMs Guild. They're a big deal in the pay money, download a PDF, role-playing game content. The press release says the deal empowers players to manage content across platforms for nearly any tabletop game, connect more easily with other players, and step into games immediately, all in one place. So this is a pretty big merger when it comes to kind of the vertical integration of the digital RPG experience. Once again, breaking traditional models of write a game, print thousands of copies, send it to a distributor, distributors send it to game stores, gamers buy it. This is the exact opposite of that. This is a 21st century approach to RPGs.
That's awesome. I wonder if this is kind of like their response to D&D Beyond, in a sense, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily directly compete with D&D Beyond because there's things you can do on Roll20 you can't do on D&D and Beyond. And there's tons of player content that you can buy that doesn't... I know Wizards of the Coast has stuff on Drive-Thru RPG as well as independent publishers. So I think it's complementary, in my opinion. And what do I know?
No, I think so too, because like you can play Shadow of the Demon Lord, you can play Call of Cthulhu, you can play Pathfinder, you can play D&D on there if you want. Obviously D&D Beyond is just D&D. It's a good integration, but you want to branch out. Like, it's interesting that Roll20 is really filling that niche.
Yeah. And of course, the big sorting of virtual platforms for these types of games. Roll20 has come out doing well. A few others have had to close up shop. So there's that. So just FYI, if you get into Roll20 and there's stuff that you want to get access to through the One Bookshelf offerings, that's going to be available to you. The other thing it could do is help independent publishers of adventures make a little more money. That's not too bad either.
Yeah, definitely.
I think
it's great.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to talk over you.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Sorry. I'll shut up now.
No, I was just saying I think it's great.
It's great. Cool. In our next news item, the nominees for the 2022 Emmy Awards were announced this week, so we won't go through all the nominations. There are dozens, but the Emmys are a big deal, and they happen as part of the Gen Con celebrations. You got Judges Spotlight winners, Best Adventure, Best Aid Accessory Digital, Same Not Digital, Best Cover Art, Interior, Best Cartography, Best Electronic Book, Best Family Game Product, Best Free Game Product, Best Game, Best Layout Design, Best Monster Adversary, Best Online Content, Best Organized Play, Podcast. We didn't make it, guys. We didn't make the Emmys. Wah, wah.
Part of it is because we didn't nominate.
We didn't nominate ourselves.
Or get nominated, yeah.
We'll get there. It's okay.
Yeah.
It'll take a while. We're a slow burn. So, production values, all kinds of other categories. I won't read them all. Please go to ENNIE-awards.com. That's ENNIE-awards.com. And go check out all the nominations. And you can vote if we get this podcast out quickly enough. You can actually vote. So if you see a product on here that you really like, you can give it a vote and get it closer to a win. And I know the people in the industry really appreciate the Emmys, and when they win Emmys and when they're nominated, it really means a lot and helps their careers. It's a good thing, and check it out.
Yeah, we had a great discussion with Mike Mason in our last episode, and we didn't talk about the Ennies, even though they're about to come out. But we did talk about some of the things that that they have done that they have been nominated for. So like Chaosium, who obviously does Call of Cthulhu, they've been nominated for the Best Aid Accessory for some of the digital gamer props for the Mask of Nyar. I won't say this wrong. Nyarlathotep. Oh my gosh, so bad.
Yes,
Anyway.
I see it right on there. Call of Cthulhu 3D digital gamer props, Masks of Nyarlathotep.
I should learn how to say that because that's like a big name in that.
Is it?
Jason probably knows how to say it. So.
Hey, Mork Borg is on there. We talked
Yeah.
about Mork Borg.
Yep. So there's some good stuff on there. So, yeah, just go check out the Ennies. What's great about the Ennies is you get nominated. There's kind of a vetting process for the nominations, and then it's fan awarded. Like the fans get to go vote.
That's right.
So kind of like the baseball All Stars.
And you can, even if you're not going to Gen Con, you can get a feeling and influence what's big at Gen Con through the Ennies, through voting, and through checking out all these new products. And usually, I hate to say it, I vote, but a lot of times I learn about stuff by seeing what made the cut for nominations for Ennies. So,
Yeah.
Yep, it's exciting, and we'll report back on if there's any interesting winners. Here's another thing that you might find interesting as a person who's writing an adventure. The 2D20 system reference document is launching this month. The system reference document is a toolkit that will allow creators to craft their own 2D20 based role-playing games and supplements. It explains all the core mechanics of the system, enabling it so game designers can create exciting experiences around Modiphius's cinematic, high action, and dramatic rule set. The SRD will be available as a downloadable PDF on the 20th of July, 2022.
Now, this is the same system that Star Trek uses, right?
It is. It is.
Okay.
So we all know how a D20 works. Somebody sets a difficulty, you roll a D20 and add your modifier. You compare and determine success or failure. A 1 or a 1 is super bad, a 20 is super awesome. On a 2D20 system, you have two stats and you add them together, and then it's a roll low. So you may have one stat that is the equivalent of your presence and one stat that is the equivalent of like your daring. Are you going to try to say something really fast to change the outcome instead of fighting a fight? You add those two numbers together, and then you roll 2d20s and roll low, and you count successes. There are other ways to buy additional d20s to get in additional successes. If you roll a 1, which is good in a 2d20 system, you can get an additional success. And of course, a 20 is, much like in a 1d20 scenario, a bad thing. So long story short, it's kind of the reverse. You figure out ways to spend resources to buy extra 20s to improve your odds. And it's about rolling low. Now, rolling low, you might think, oh, I never want to play a rolling low game. Let me tell you, if you got a box of D20s and you've banished half of them for rolling low, get them out and play 2D20 system. And if you're playing 2D20 system and one dice is just killing you constantly, set that one aside for D&D. It's going to be useful. You think I'm kidding, but my group actually does that now because I play Star Trek Klingon Empire. I have the Klingon dice with the Klingon symbol for the 1, right? They're really cool. They're like red and black, and they're very on theme. Those things pop 20s constantly. And I'm like, you're better D&D dice than Klingon dice. That's terrible.
That's hilarious.
But, so anyway, Modiphius has been doing a lot of great work, taking over a lot of IPs. They remind me of FFG back in the day when they were just rolling through and expanding. And so it's really kind of catching on. I remember when the system was launched with the Star Trek Adventures game when we were at Gen Con in I want to say 17 or 18. So I think it was 2017. So it's a cool thing. And it's different. So you have like two pods. You have like two groups of 6 stats, and you match them to you and the GM figure out how to match them together. To figure out what you should be rolling. Unlike like a stat that you're always trying to increase, you are trying to increase it because you're trying to roll low, but you're always pairing. You have 12 stats, and you're trying to grab one from one side and one from the other, and come up with a number that it gets you the most successes.
Very cool. Yeah, so this is essentially the 2D20 version of Genesis, right? Where it's a agnostic setting rule set that you can basically put any skin, any adventure, any world you want onto it if you like the rules. So I think it's cool. I wonder, how much do you think it'll be as a PDF?
I think it'll be free.
Real? Oh, wow.
I think it'll be a free download. And that's my guess. And if I'm mistaken, I apologize. That's fake news. No, I think it'll be free, much like the the D20 SRD is, the system reference document. It's free right now. You can, the one that Wizards of the Coast does for D20.
Yeah.
So to be quite honest, you can come up with your own IP right now. You can do a 1D20 version of it. You can do a 2D20 version of it. You can do Genesis, and then you can do the one that goes with Numerana. What's the name of that system? Numenera. Yeah. So you can, if you had your own cool IP, you could, tackle 4 systems, and people could be playing your IP in the one that they like the most. In the rule set, they're more comfortable in. So
Very
that's
good.
kind of fun too. All right, that's the news, and I'm Dennis Miller.
Nice. That's for all you kids out there. That's an old school reference.
Yeah, I'm getting into old Saturday. I'm listening to Fly in the Wall podcast with Dana Carvey and David Spade, and they roll old school with the old Saturday Night Live references. So
Nice.
they're all top of mind for me right now. Apologies.
Very good. Well, as we promised earlier in the show, we were going to talk about the ever-present threat in games and what does that mean. So we talked about this, Jason, I think a little bit in our Shadow of the Demon Lord episode way back when. But as I was prepping through this storytelling collective, writing my Call of Cthulhu adventure, this came up as it talked about writing villains and how, not only do you need a compelling villain in your story, but you need an ever-present threat in the background to give that flavor. So what does this mean? What is an ever-present threat in games?
Well, it's it's something that's, I think at one point we talked about how it was in the background. I don't know if it needs to necessarily be in the background, but it's something that's larger than the players can take care of in a normal adventure. Some systems make it this very large overarching thing the players will never be able to take care of. An example is the probably the Void in Shadow of the Demon Lord. I don't think, homebrews, you could do whatever you want. I don't think there was really an intention for us to ever fix the crack in the world that is letting the Void seep through. That's just happening, and it's a doomed place to be. But it's an overarching threat that's constantly causing problems maybe not causing problems the players have to deal with, but it's causing an oppression that is leading towards issues that are affecting the players' lives. It doesn't, and here's a thought. I think we tend to think of it as it's always kind of an evil or a bad thing. I don't know if it necessarily has to be, but it's just something that's there that is having an effect on the world that is driving into the experience that the players are having, and in one sense can unify the players together towards a common objective to deal with it.
Yeah, I think you actually bring up a really interesting point that it doesn't have to be evil, right? But it does have to bring conflict, because conflict is what drives stories. Conflict is what brings, stress. Conflict is what makes things interesting in storytelling, right? Without conflict, it's just vanilla ice cream, right, out there. Like, it's just really, really boring. So go ahead. I was going to say, so you need conflict to drive it forward. So the ever-present threat may not be evil, but it needs to be a source of potential conflict.
And it's
that's out
conflict
there.
between, not necessarily between players. Like, it doesn't have to be player conflict. In fact, it shouldn't. That shouldn't be what drives player conflict. That if that you're going to have player conflict in your games, it should be something else that's causing that probably. But it's conflict between, maybe the player group, and the game setting itself or the world. Is that what you mean?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. The conflict, it comes from. You kind of touched on this, in my opinion. The conflict comes from when the ever-present threat is out there, but things bubble up that the players have to kind of take care of, right? That are there. You mentioned the Demon Lord, the Void, right? Like, because there's corruption seeping into the world, corruption is like popping up here or there. I think I got Call of Cthulhu on the brain now, but the fact is like the Elder Gods are this
It's a
constant
great
threat
example.
that are out there, and very rarely will your adventurers ever deal with the Elder Gods. Yet the threat of him is out there because there's all these cultists running around trying to summon them, right? So
They're
the
dealing
threat,
with the influence of them.
exactly. So like what are some other examples that we can think of that, like, there's this constant threat that's out there that cause conflict, that cause the or that drive influence to other people, I guess.
I think Dan put one on our list here that's probably very near and dear to his heart.
The Empire's near and dear to my heart.
Well, Star
You
Wars.
Sith, you
Wars.
Sith, you.
We know deep down.
No. It's really the Empire because, well, for most of it, if you're playing during that time period, it's like this thing that is just always underneath your feet. The Empire, not specifically the Emperor, but it's the Empire that, prevents everyone from living a prosperous life.
Yeah.
You
Or in
know.
my perspective, the Jedi Order.
Right. Yeah. Let's have that debate. Right. So that being said, it's like, okay, well, you're going to go do that, but if you start shooting that up, a bunch of guys in white outfits are going to start asking questions, and you can see that in the movies. One of the problems with the Empire is that George Lucas defanged them after the Ewoks used their helmets as drums.
Right.
But they were a really cool bad guy up until that moment. So sometimes it's hard to kind of, give them the edge that they need. But if you're playing the game, you can always outnumber the good guys with the Empire. The Empire always has a numbers advantage. And so that's really the problem. They're all over the place, and there's too many of them.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, right? So it's a numbers game. You're outnumbered, and that's where conflict comes in, right? Because no matter where you go, there's this threat that some stormtrooper could stumble onto your plans or something like that, just because there's so gosh darn many of them out there. And there's always some imperial bureaucrat that wants to make a name for himself that's happy to bring you guys in and make an example of you or whatever it is, right?
And something like that can be a more tangible threat than the void or the corruption seeping into the world. That's a little bit more abstract. So depending on your kind of storytelling preference, something kind of very tangible like big gray triangle ship starts shooting at you, what do is very different than corruption is seeping into the hearts of men.
I mean, with that said, though, like you could call like a Darth Vader or someone like that a big bad, right? That's out there that like your characters may never really see Darth Vader unless they get to a certain point where they're causing too big of a clamor or whatever. But big bad threat of Darth Vader out there, or his, and not just Darth Vader is the big bad threat, and then what you see is his like Imperial Inquisitors showing up at places, right? There's the influence of the localized manifestation of the big threat.
And that's why if you play in the era where Vader is still walking around and the Emperor is still walking around, that you don't want to become too noticeable, because if you're a Force user and you gain the power that you seek to be able to be a better Force user, you're also going to gain more dangerous enemies, and before you know it, you're going to be staring down the red lightsaber of the black armor. And the stats that FFG and every other company that have made for that guy make him really, really dangerous. You actually don't want to deal with him on the board, because he will hurt you over and over and over again. So there's that. Sorry, we went down the Star Wars rat hole.
I think
That's okay. Let me take
go ahead,
a
please.
minute here and expand this outside of RPGs, right? I
Yep.
think it's easy in RPGs to have it, because in our RPGs typically, or tabletop RPGs, or any RPGs, they typically have a setting that you play in that's a persistent setting.
Yeah.
Board games, I think, also have this threat can have this threat over them too. And right, obviously, we're not talking about Candyland or anything like that, but the concept of that there is something there. Arkham Horror is a great example, right? It's in Arkham Horror, there's something that's driving the players to actually try to buff themselves up, to get items, to play through the game. There's the mythos phase itself. There's always going to be a card you're drawing at the end that's going to make it even harder for you to continue to meet your objective in the game. No matter what you do, that mythos phase is always coming, and you're always going to draw that card. There's, another example is Castle Ravenloft, to a 2010 board game. The Strahd himself is somewhere mixed into the monster deck, right? Like there is always an opportunity that he could pop early in that game. Mm-hmm. So you're always you always kind of have that on the brain. You have that on the mind, that I can't just be willy-nilly around the board and taking my sweet time. I've got to be prepping myself for what could come. There's that concept of threat, I think the imminent threat or the ever existing threat isn't just tied to role-playing games.
Well, yes, and I think if you are thinking like, okay, how do I incorporate this into my game? If I'm writing a homebrew, how do I do this? I think a great place to look at is like movies and films, because a lot of times especially when you get into sequels, there's a bigger, broader threat that's there that kind of keeps the movies sort of linked together. You see this in Alien, which is funny because you think that the threat, the ever-present threat, is the xenomorphs. It's actually not. It's the corporations, right? Like they're the ever-present threat there. You look at Indiana Jones. It's the Nazis, right, and Adolf Hitler and all that stuff. You look at Terminator, and Skynet is the ever-present threat, but you just deal with the manifestations of that ever-present threat that's far in the future, right? Skynet's far in the future. You're dealing with that ever-present threat by having to deal with Terminators that have been sent in the past. So it's like, how do we defeat Skynet? Okay, well, like we have to go do these things, but there's a Terminator in our way, right, that was sent by Skynet. So you can see how the ever-present threat really flavors the direct action sequences or conflicts that happen in the game, even though the players don't touch on that directly.
Yeah, I think Friday the 13th, or any of the Jason Voorhees movies are an example, right? He's this otherworldly thing, and slasher's a little bit more of a fun, thing than a thriller necessarily. But if you ever played the old NES game, Friday the 13th game, boy, that game had an ever-present threat. At any moment in time, Jason could just show up on your side scroller and chase you. Yeah. But man, and that was a tough game too.
That was a really tough game.
Yeah.
Jason would show up and you're like, I'm dead.
That's it. Game over. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I think it's an important point that it's in movies, it's in role-playing games, it's in board games. It's probably in our real lives. There's,
Right.
at various
Yeah.
phases of our lives, there's an ever-present threat that's driving us towards some sort of conflict with the world around us. It's just a reality, but that's part of we escape into games into a fantasy setting, but we still deal with a lot of the things that we deal with in the real world, just in a setting where we can have a little bit more maybe empowerment and choices around it.
So
Not to get deep.
No, I mean, I think that's great. One of the things that we're sort of drawing some source material from is an article that was written back in 2019, and it's from the Improved Initiative blog, and they gave some examples of what works well. But what I thought was interesting is what happens when you don't have the ever-present threat in your game. And they talked about in this blog Vampire the Masquerade, and how in Vampire the problem that they had is that there was no overarching you got to save the world, you got to prevent the world from being destroyed type of thing, and because of that, it was hard to get all of the player characters on the same page, because all the player characters had their own goals, their own ambitions, their own backstories that were leading them in different directions, but there was nothing to unite them to get them kind of all rowing in the same direction and feeling like part of a team. They're just all very individualized. So
yeah, I think this is a good example, but I think it's a little contrived because
it might be. I never played Vampire, so I don't know.
I did.
Well, yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Jay.
was just
you
going
had
to
a
say, I think it's an example. It's an example of maybe the setting itself didn't have the threat, but an appropriately contrived campaign in that setting absolutely could. You could have a vampiric council that is causing problems across the land, and maybe there's a blood tax, and it's just keeping you down on your knees, or there's vampire hunters guilds. There's all sorts of things you could do to have it. I think what the article was trying to do was show that the setting itself did not provide a large scale threat that affected everybody who played inside that setting versus some of the other things that some of the other systems that they came up with later.
So,
well, and if you just real quickly, Dan, if you look at the games that we talked about that have this, Shadow of the Demon Lord, Call of Cthulhu, right? Those are baked into the setting. The ever-present threat is baked into the setting of that game. So I don't know. I mean, this might feel a little contrived with Vampire, but I think his point still stands in that the ever-present threat should kind of be part of your world building a little bit, so that when you're writing adventures inside of it, it's already baked in there. You already know the flavor of the world that you're in.
Yeah, but world building doesn't have to be defined by the core system setting.
So,
all right,
did you ever play Vampire, Jay?
I didn't play this version that he's referring to.
Yeah, the Masquerade, because I come from that era of gaming where we tried everything that was new,
yeah.
Even some stinkers that are on the ash heap of history.
Well, I did play a one shot of it years ago.
Right, and so there's a different conceit with the White Wolf games than your average RPG. Let me explain to you. So, if you're playing Cthulhu, you play a normal kind of person, even if you're a gangster, and you're slowly going down the rabbit hole into the descent of how weird the world is. That's the conceit, right? If you're playing D&D, the GM basically says, here's our problem of the week, let's go fight it, or let's go roll random encounters. For White Wolf games, it demanded the player really get into the lore, and so there's a fabric, there's a basis of understanding, so that when the GM starts pulling threads of what's going on in the story, the players understand which threads are getting pulled and why that matters. They did the same thing with Werewolf and all the other ones, where they really asked everybody, everybody wanted to get a copy of the main book, you needed it not to make a character and figure out how to min-max. Nobody really cared about that as much. It was, okay, well, I want to be this kind of vampire. What does that mean? And what does this lineage mean? And what does this faction mean? And that was part of what the conceit of the game required. And so if you were going to set up, to Jay's point, if you were going to set up an ever-present threat, it required everybody to kind of like opt into at least get on board with the lore. And then the GM can do their work. Because sometimes you would play those games without doing that, and the GM had to basically spend a lot of time storytelling and getting everybody up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point a lot, Jason, which is that the GM can create their own ever-present threat. And in fact, I was thinking about Star Wars and, the Empire being the ever-present threat. But, man, if you're playing in the Outer Rim, all of a sudden, like, the Hutts are the closer ever-present threat in that moment. Like, the Empire still may be out there as the bigger, badder thing, but it doesn't matter because you're closer to the Hutts being the bigger threat in the moment. So I think you can always change it. I just feel like if you are going to write an RPG system and setting and really sell it as like a package kind of thing, rather than just like a rule set, I think that you should have a ever-present threat in there as part of the lore of your setting, just because that gives a lot of direction for your world,
we might. It's not that some systems. Here, let me start it this way. Some systems are very setting focused.
Yes.
Other systems are more themed, with a mechanical base that allows you to create a setting inside that theme. I think Mothership is a good example of that.
Okay.
There's not one specific setting in Mothership. Like, not every Mothership module you played, they're not all tied together. Like, you couldn't point and say, well, that spaceship from the derelict ship that we did in that adventure must be over in that quadrant. They're not. It's not necessarily one continuous setting, but there's a theme that is consistent across all of the Mothership content. And there's a mechanic-based system in there. Each module, which plays as really its own thing, and that doesn't mean it's a one-shot. It just means it is a module that you can make several one-shots from, or you could do a full campaign in if you wanted in Mothership. Each module creates an ever-present threat that is a part of the implementation of the theme of Mothership in the setting that module created, that the players then play inside of while they play that module. So I guess that's an example of maybe a game system that I think can focus more on theme and give the freedom of establishing setting to the GM.
So here's a little bit of a hot take. I don't think Mothership has an ever-present threat.
Okay, so
I think they have an ever-present theme, but I don't know if that's the same as an ever-present threat. Right? So yeah, go ahead.
So I would argue a difference, right? So as an example, the Mothership module, A Pound of Flesh, takes place on Prospero's Dream. It's a station, right? Yep. That station is slowly leaking oxygen, and you are trapped on that station. Okay. Inside of that module. When everyone sits down and says, guess what, guys, we're gonna play the campaign A Pound of Flesh. You now have an instant
that's true.
ever-present threat, which is you will run out of oxygen at some point on this station. So that's just one little example.
Okay, I agree. I agree with that. I was just thinking there's no like Sauron of Mothership.
I don't think there has to be. Like you said, it's just something that causes conflict.
It's true. And like I'm kind of going back on my words a little bit right there. So
it's a discussion.
I think you're absolutely right. Like that, the idea of that is definitely an ever-present threat in this scenario. I was just thinking that from scenario to scenario, because they are all standalone adventures essentially, right? There's nothing like behind it that is like a giant ever-present threat, but that's also not Mothership either, right? Like Mothership is all about these kind of one-shots that you could loosely link together.
It's probably my fault
you
too
know.
because I always kill you guys in one shot. You don't get
We
a
kill
chance to
ourselves.
actually experience
We kill
the connection.
ourselves.
Yes, you
Yeah,
do.
you know.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, I
So,
played that at Gen Con. This guy has a pile of characters. He's like, yeah, everybody take 2. One's going to die.
Which is great. I mean, that's part of the fun of it all, honestly. Is like these horrific deaths that you end up doing. And so I mean, that's the system that Mothership is, right? And contrast that with probably the closest game that's out there to it, the Alien RPG. That has some very distinct ever-present threats that we
yes.
talked about before, right? There's the corporations that are out there. There's the xenomorphs that are wandering the universe. There's, a lot of stuff out there, but that has a broader thematic and, setting ever-present threat that Mothership does not. I would say Mothership has scenario-based threats,
It
right?
does, yeah.
So...
that's
so it's
true.
interesting. You can go both ways, which I think was what you were originally trying to say.
Let me boil this
Jason.
down. The ever-present threat in a Mothership game is the GM.
Yes. There you go. Well said.
So if you are trying to come up with like a homebrew, right? If you're trying to come up with something that you want to, put in there, like you're coming up with a new world, a new setting, a new scenario, something like that. Like, what's your? Let's do it. Let's do it, this, guys. I'm writing about a mine in northern Nevada. Cthulhu style stuff, right? So weird supernatural things are happening. What do you think would be a good ever-present threat that I could incorporate into that scenario? This is 1870s Northern Nevada, Wild West mining town.
So, couple things that are environmental. Okay.
Okay.
Let's just start with that. Darkness, closed space, lack of air, no easy escape. Now that's not like a Sauron. We're not doing Sauron there.
Right.
But you start thinking about the psychological terror of going down into a mine. You take any one of those 4 things, put a ghost in it or put a demon on it. It's like, oh, this is a demon that's closing the space in on you worse. Or, oh, now everybody can't breathe, or for some metaphysical reason. And
Right.
you could just, turn everybody on a spit from a tension standpoint.
I love that, Dan. I think the environmental, right? Jason talked about it in his Mothership example, the air running out, an environmental threat that's just in the background, right? Because if that's there, you're still having to deal with the problems that are coming up, right? Like maybe you run into a bunch of deranged miners. Maybe you have to, wade across this sludge pool to get to something that's got its own issues there. Those are like local challenges that are sort of a representation again of the bigger threat, which is this mine itself, right? The environmental part of the mine. So that's really good.
Then you have to ask the question, the fundamental is, why did they stop mining here? What stopped them? They were financially motivated to go get a thing, and how come they're not down there anymore? And that can be kind of fun.
I think that these can be tricky too. Out of the Abyss is a good example of trying to do that, where the players are kind of trapped deep in some area. And Out of the Abyss started by trying, it started by saying limited resources, and I think this is maybe a setting, maybe not setting, a mechanical theme inside of Dungeons and Dragons. Is limited resources. Wizards have limited spells per day before they have to rest. I guess 5th edition put cantrips in, but anyways, kind of substantial spells. If you are a hardcore player, you have a limited number of arrows that you can knock. Those kinds of things. But I tell you, fun when we played Out of the Abyss, I thought, when I read that campaign and started, I thought, oh, this is interesting. They're going to have to actually, forage for food to try to give a sense of really like I'm trapped in this area that's not helping me survive. Well, one of the players was had the spell that could just create fresh water, like
that was me.
4 gallons of fresh water a day, and he was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just cast that once a day, and then we'll all fill our bags." It's like, all right, instantly that threat was gone. Well, okay,
Right.
what about food? Well, I'll just cast Hero's Feast once a day. Well, I'll eat. Okay, all right, well, so environmentals are good, but I think you got to be careful because players are creative, and obviously that was kind of an easy way out the door there. But like if you say like you're going to run out of fuel for your torches, or the players will come up with some creative way to solve that problem, and then they'll overcome that threat.
Yeah, which is why you got to hit them 3 or 4 different angles.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
But if you're hitting them with 3 or 4 different angles, does that threat really qualify as what we're talking about here, which is an ever-present threat? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I was going to go down to a mine, not in a Call of Cthulhu universe, I'd be worried about darkness, running out of air, in closed spaces.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like cave-ins and right.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean,
that could be something. Maybe the mine is unstable from the beginning, and everyone knows it's unstable.
There you go.
My point. Maybe I didn't make my point as clear as I wanted to. You attach whatever the mythic threat is to one of those other natural threats, and they compound each other.
Just like in the latest Ghostbusters movie, or the kid Ghostbusters movie, where like the town is always having an earthquake every now and then. It's not just it's this earthquake that like could make everybody's houses fall apart, but it's tied to, spoiler, but the movie's old now. Tied to the ghost demon thing that's trying to escape.
Right.
That's causing that to happen. So yeah, maybe your mind is it's unstable, and from the first episode, or from when they first step in there, the tunnel collapses and now they're trapped in the mine, and like every 15 minutes or maybe every 30 minutes there's a chance for another cave-in somewhere else in the mine, and
right.
It's tied to some eldritch being trying to rip or something. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's very good. Very good.
Because they're not going to be able to fix that themselves. Like, you can't stop the mine from caving in.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All you can do is deal with the problems that present themselves, right? And so, yeah, no, I think that's great. So, Dan, I thought you've got a natural GM instinct here. You're like, okay, well, you're talking mine, like go environmental, right? So, what if you're writing like a D&D adventure, or what if you're writing something more sword and board style, or just even a generic sci-fi adventure? What kind of ever-present threats do you guys would you think that would be important in those ones?
First of all, you don't have to go raid Tolkien or any of the other big, fantasy IPs out there. I would say come up with something, not necessarily whole cloth new, but adapt something from another genre that works great or interests you in a different genre. So, for instance, when Jay was running Firefly for us, he was like, he went straight to the Westerns and used those Western plot lines. And that worked out real well because because Firefly is a Western in space, but we didn't need to go to Asimov, right? So you have to kind of break kind of the consistent tropes and expectations, right? You got to come up with something that's different and unique to you, and I would say draw inspiration from alternative sources of media, and mix and match.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jason. I think you're about to say something.
I was just going to say a very easy example, kind of like the Star Wars Empire, is the Klingon Empire in the Star Trek, right? There's this giant nebulous, other alien or other presence out there that is domineering in a sci-fi setting that will always be able to potentially pop up in your arm of the galaxy and cause a problem you're gonna have to deal with immediately. The orcs in Warhammer, right? Like, then if you see, you could be doing whatever you want, solving all your crime and thriller and suspense stuff on a planet, but all of a sudden if the klaxons go off and say there's an orc invasion fleet coming, everything else stops. You have to deal with that, right?
Yeah, very true. Very true. One of the things that I was thinking about is that some of my favorite video games take place when there's a conflict in the setting. And usually it's when two civilizations collide a little bit, and that provides some interesting kind of conflict and background. So if you look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you had this Norseman that was operating in England, and so you had that kind of like Norse versus, Anglo-Saxon stuff that was happening there. So because of that sort of merging of empires or merging of civilizations that was happening, there was a swirl of conflict that always happened there, right? People either hated the Danes or they hated the English or they hated the, and so that conflict, that background conflict that's happening, could even function as an ever-present threat. And I think that goes to your earlier point, Jason, which is sometimes the ever-present threat doesn't have to be evil, right? You had this mixing of societies, this mixing of civilizations, and that's not necessarily evil. It's just two peoples blending into each other. Now, there could be bad people, nefarious actors that are working on both sides that you may have to deal with, right? But that background conflict that's happening there is providing a nice setting for interesting adventures because you have to do something about something sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I think you could look to that. Like, if I was writing a D&D adventure, it might be interesting to think like, okay, well, there's these two kingdoms that are at war with each other, and you're not on either side. You're just sort of you're sort of just adventurers that are there. So which side do you take? Like, are you on one side one day and one side the other day? How does that play into it? Like, do you meet good people on both sides? Do you meet bad people on both sides? And I think that provides a nice ever-present threat, quote-unquote threat in that scenario.
Back on the video game that I'm playing a game right now called 12 Minutes, which is a fun little puzzle game where you play a husband. You got husband and wife, you got a small apartment, and you're trapped in a time loop that resets we'll say every 12 minutes, but it resets every 12 minutes. You're trying to solve this kind of murder mystery that deals with what's inside your apartment. But every time you play, if you die, it resets to you entering the apartment. But you keep your memories from the last time, the last time loop. So as you play the game, the dialogues open up and you kind of unravel a puzzle so that you can do different things. The problem is at the 5-minute mark, every time at the 5-minute mark, a cop knocks on your door, and it changes what you're able to do from that point forward because you don't have time to do anything. So every time the time loop resets, you're like, okay, and then you start rushing. I'm going to grab the knife from the counter. I'm grabbing the pills from the medicine cabinet. I'm doing everything as fast as I can because I know at that 5-minute mark in real-time gameplay, that cop is going to knock at that door and it's going to trigger a sequence. And I got to try to explore and unravel more of the puzzle before that 5-minute mark hits. So that's an example of, it's not necessarily some evil threat or something, but it's like a time mechanic that's causing this conflict with me and the game setting that's driving my initiative and driving my purpose for what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, we talked about time travel in one of our previous podcasts, and I mean, an ever-present threat could be the Marty McFly conundrum, right? I've got to get back to my home before I disappear.
Your home's gone forever, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in the
not in Derek universe, it's not.
I know.
In my time travel RPG, it was you're going to mess up your time travel coordinates, and space and time is going to rip your body to pieces.
Ooh.
And
Yeah.
so, that was always kind of like, do you guys really want, you guys can all time travel. Do you really want to? If you fail this check, it's going to hurt in new ways.
Yeah.
So
As it should for messing with the natural order.
that's right.
So
What game was that? I remember that.
that was a Benjamin Franklin time travel.
That's
right?
right.
The League of Benjamin Franklin's lead of rogue time traveler, renegade time travelers.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that.
Copyright trademark Dan Pomeroy 2022.
That's right. It's just been
It's my
Just
IP. It's my IP. Stay away.
yeah. So, look, there's so many ever-present threats that you can do, and I love the fact that we kind of touched on the idea that it doesn't always have to be like a demon lord coming through a rift in the void, or Sauron there. Like, it could be so many other things. It can be environmental. It can be time. It can be, clashing civilizations. It can be, it could be the police, even. It could be a future threat from Skynet, I mean, like, there's so many things that you can do, and just realize that, like, if you bake this into your scenarios, if you bake this into your settings that you have for the games, that it will provide a very rich and a fertile ground for the seeds of new adventures. So hopefully this inspired you guys as much as it did me, and hopefully Dan and Jason. And if you liked this episode, if you liked what you hear, hit us up on social media. Hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter. Jump into our Discord with us. Talk with us for a little bit. That'd be great. We'd love to hear what you think about this, and we'd love to hear some of your ideas on what you would use for your ever-present threat. So thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate the support that you give us, and we'll see you next time. Keep the dice rolling.
Thanks.